Headlines of the Daily News said, Mob Big got data from cop. I'm angry enough right now that if I saw something happening in the street, possibility I wouldn't do a goddamn thing about it, because it's none of my fucking business.
What would happen next would be looked to be ripped right out of a movie. It starts with the aforementioned hit on Gambino crime boss Paul Castellano. John Gotti, in December 1985, decides to move on Paul Castellano without the other 5 crime families' permission.
As the reputed head of the crime commission and the godfather of the Gambino family, his appearance in court every day and the preoccupation with his defense were bad for business. Experts say his associates may very well have decided Big Paul was more trouble than he was worth.
This is against the Mafia's code, and the price for killing a boss without permission is death. Vic Amuso and Anthony Casso, boss and underboss respectively, were assigned to the hit on Gotti. On April 13, 1986, in Dyker Heights, Brooklyn, a C4 plastic explosive was detonated when a John Gotti lookalike and underboss Frank DiCicco got into their car. The explosive puzzled the FBI and even the mob guys not in the know. Car bombs were always off limits for the NYC families. The choice of car bombing was done by design. The idea was that the FBI and other families not in the know would think it was the quote-unquote Zips from Sicily who sanctioned the Gotti bomb. The ruse might have confused the feds, but it wasn't long before the Gambinos under Gotti ordered a hit on Anthony Casso. This is where our story picks back up. On Sunday, September 12, 1986, in Brooklyn, Casso was sitting in his car outside of Carvel, waiting for an associate while he ate an ice cream cone, when a car pulls up alongside Casso's vehicle and begins spraying bullets. Casso gets hit, but slips out of the car and runs to a nearby restaurant. He locks himself into the freezer and waits for the coast to be cleared. Eventually, the NYPD caught up with him. Casso, of course, for his part, had his normal retorts. No, I don't know anyone who would want to hurt me. I don't know nothing about organized crime. After this attempt on his life, Casso was fuming, and his rage and need for revenge was godlike. When none of his normal crime associates were able to come up with the identities of the hit squad, Casso turned to Kaplan and asked him to tag the 2 cops. Kaplan, for his part, knew that he had struck gold with these cops and was going to play the go-between to ensure he would see a piece of the action and raise his own star with the underboss. Stephen Carracappa, being on the organized crime unit in Brooklyn, was easily able to get the names Casso desperately wanted. Kaplan negotiated the terms, and the 2 cops would each get $4,000 every month for providing any police investigation information. Plus, they would also get a bonus for any hits they performed.
Case of Jimmy Heidel, a rival mobster who was tapped to kill Casso. Heidel botched the job, only wounding him, and then Casso hunted Heidel down.
Took him to a place that I had prearranged, somebody's house that I could use. I brought him in there, sat him down. I wanted to know why I was shot, and who told you, and who else was involved, and who told you, who gave you the orders to shoot me.
After you were finished with it, you killed it.
Right.
Was it just one shot to the head?
No, I didn't shoot him in that. I didn't shoot him. I was in somebody's house. You make a mess. I shot him a couple of times. I didn't torture the kid. I didn't do anything like that. I shot him a couple of times. The kid died.
Well, what's a couple?
More than a couple. It's a couple. Really, I don't know the exact amount. Maybe I shot him 10 times, 12 times.
Maybe 15 even.
It could have been 15.
Why?
It's the hatred I had for him. I wanted to beat him with the gun after it was empty. He just tried to kill me. He doesn't deserve anything. That's the law anyway.
That was your law?
There's the law of the mafia.
So we know Anthony Casso killed Heidel. But the question remains, how did Casso get his hands on Heidel? And that's the million-dollar question that ties into our Mafia Cops. So after he leaves the freezer, Casso goes to the hospital, claiming he was shot in an attempted robbery. While the doctors treat him, he refuses to let them remove any of the 6 bullets lodged in him. He didn't want the cops to be able to use those bullets as evidence. This would-be hit team would be all his, he thought. No way was he going to allow some cops get his hands on them first. When he first hears Jimmy Hidell, he was incredulous. Hidell was known as a neighborhood tough guy and wannabe mafioso. He was also a psychopath who at one point abducted a 19-year-old girl waiting at a bus stop. He assaulted her. Yeah, that type of assault. You know, the type that YouTube won't let us say. And then he killed her. This type of behavior was said to have run afoul of mafia rules. But yet here we are. Jimmy Hidell was a Gambino family associate. Anthony Casso's corrupt FBI agent, Doug McCain, was looking into the whole thing for gas pipe. It was Louis Eppolito and Stephen Carracappa, everyone's favorite detectives, who were tapped to abduct Jimmy Hidell. The 2 cops even offered to kill Hidell for Casso, but Casso wanted to know who hired this low-level thug to kill him. He knew he was just a trigger man. Eppolito and Carracappa were bold and arrogant in their ways of stalking out their prey. Jimmy Hidell lived with his mother on Staten Island, and the 2 cops made no attempt to hide their presence outside the home. Betty Hidell, seeing these 2 sitting in the car in front of her home, eventually come out and question them after they roughed up her younger son, Frank Hidell. Frank, for his part, was an organized crime, but really didn't have the same character makeup. Later be killed by the mob in an unrelated event, as he was a rat. When the 2 cops roughed him up, Frank Hidell told them where to find his brother Jimmy. There are 2 different accounts on where he was ultimately found, but all accounts agreed he was picked up in Brooklyn and went willingly with the 2 cops, thinking it was business as usual. In the car, Hidell would ask, "What's this about?" Eppolito would menacingly retort, "Oh, you'll find out soon enough." The cops would drive to the same Brooklyn garage that they previously killed Israel Greenwald at. If Hidell was suspicious before, he must have been downright scared when he saw the empty rows of garages. "Keep quiet and get in the trunk," Carracappa growled no louder than a whisper. The date was October 18, 1986, which was about 1 month from the attempted hit on Casso. The 2 cops with Hidell now in the trunk made their way to a Toys R Us in Mill Basin, Brooklyn, where Casso anxiously waited in his own vehicle. As Casso took possession of the cop's car, he reminded himself that Hidell was just a triggerman, and as much, this was about revenge. He needed to find out who put out the hit. Was it Genevieve's mob boss, Vincent the Chin Gigante? Was it John Gotti looking for revenge for the car bombing? Worse yet, someone in his own family. Lord knows the list of people who would want a piece of Casso was long as it was wide, but who was crazy enough to try? Car with Hidell in the trunk through quiet, tree-lined streets of Mill Basin, Brooklyn. When Casso opened the trunk, Hidell knew he messed up, and his worst nightmare was about to become reality. Casso, for his part, relishes in retelling the story, how he used Hidell for target practice, and his official biography goes into great detail how Casso pulled the trigger at point-blank range on Hidell's parts. He goes into a very strange detail about the mushroom head disappearing, and you can tell he fondly remembers something that truly happened. While Jimmy Hidell sat tied up in the basement of that Brooklyn home, Casso would have a parade of wise guys in and out through the night. He had a badly bruised Hidell retell the story of his attempted hit. He wanted permission from the other families to go after all involved. As each wise guy came in, Hidell would recount. Nicky Guido and Bobby Baring were his partners in crime. Hidell, chained and shackled, was never going to leave that basement, but Casso got him to talk. The hit was ordered by Mickey Boy Paradiso, Bobby Borello, and Eddie Lino. All 3 of them made men in the John Gotti-led Gambino family. Casso had Sammy the Bull Gravano, the underboss of the Gambinos, over to hear Hidell's story. Sammy, for his part, wasn't interested in that story. He wanted to know, How did Casso manage to get his hands on Heidel without ever firing a bullet? Casso would tell him he had a crystal ball and to not worry about it. Eventually, Heidel would say at the end of the ordeal, "I know you're going to kill me, but I have a life insurance policy that will pay out for my mother. Can you please throw my body out into the streets so my mother will be taken care of?" Casso, for his part, told him, "Don't worry, I'll do that for you." Heidel's body has never been found all these decades later. Casso would start on a bloodthirsty revenge after Heidel disappeared. Louis Eppolito and Stephen Carracappa, the two detectives, would assist in any way possible. The cops delivered an envelope with Bob Beringer's home address. Casso had Beringer's home staked out for weeks, but he was long gone and had the good sense to disappear into Long Island. Not far enough, if you ask me, but it did save his life. Louis Eppolito was positive that they had the right Bob Beringer, but Nicky Guido came up with a few choices. Louis wanted an additional $4,000 to look into Nicky Guido, but Casso felt the cops were being greedy. So, Casso, for his part, had an associate in the gas company run the name and came back with a Nicky Guido in Brooklyn that fit the right age. On Christmas Day, 1986, Casso had a crew sitting double parked on Nicky Guido's block. They were looking for a red sports car and a big Italian kid. Eventually, Nicky Guido would come out with an old-looking relative to show off his new sports car. Casso's crew took this moment to move on the Guido. Two wise guys get out of the car and open fire on the younger Guido. Nicky, for his part, shielded his uncle and took several bullets to the chest. He laid eyes open and no longer breathing. Nicky Guido died on that Christmas morning in 1986. The news seized on this senseless killing on Christmas, of all days. The news would report of a nice, young man who graduated from John Jay Criminal Justice College and dreamed of becoming a cop one day. The Nicky Guido they killed had no gang or mafia ties. Louis Eppolito, with his greed, and Casso, a bloodthirsty psychopath, realized they got the wrong man. The right Nicky Guido was asleep on a couch in his mom's apartment when the news broke that Nicholas Guido was shot and killed. Something his mother would later tell the detectives was surreal and scary. Now this is where things get really interesting. Detectives would eventually put it together that there was another Nicky Guido that was in the same age group as the one slain, but this one has been arrested several times. So, according to a police report, detectives stopped by the criminal Nicky Guido's mother's house, and they had relayed that they heard her son was the intended target. The mother, for her part, surprisingly agreed that she had heard the same thing. She said her son seemed shaken by the news of the killing. This was her first inkling that something was off. She would also say that the trouble started when a blonde-haired boy by the name of Jimmy started showing up at the house. She relayed that this Jimmy looked like trouble and she didn't like him. The cop said that her son should turn himself in for his own protection. Now, Bob Bering, the other would-be assassin who previously disappeared, had heard the same rumors, and he decided he had to turn himself in to save himself. Bob had been a New York City transit cop for more than 7 years until he was arrested on a narcotic charge. The charge sent him to Rikers Island jail, where he met Jimmy Heidel. When he turned himself in, he cooperated, and he told the detectives how he and Heidel went on a killing spree, describing where to find the bodies, among other crimes. The police would use Bob Bering to try to ensnare Nicky Guido, but he never bought into it. Casso, for his part, would still try to hunt down these two, but he was never successful. Casso also tried to hunt down Mickey Boy Paradiso, the person that ordered the hit, but the feds got to him first. Next up was Borrelio, and Casso paid Eppolito and Carracappa to get him the address. They obliged and went the extra mile to get him the make and model of his car as well. It took no more than a couple weeks, and the papers talked about the gangsters who was executed in his own driveway with 2 in the head and 6 in the body. The final man left, Eddie Leno, a capo, or captain in the Gambino family. He was well known among all the families. Eddie had a house in a very wealthy neighborhood in Long Island. Casso had put out a hit, but for 2 years, no one could get close enough to execute the contract. Lino, like most seasoned wise guy, was beyond paranoid. Changed his routine up daily. He would watch for cars that seemed to follow, and he would never let his guard down. When Casso couldn't get Eddie Lino with his usual list of killers, Casso would turn to Burt Kaplan to bring the hit to the two cops. The offer was simple, $75,000 to take out Eddie Lino. Casso was ecstatic when Kaplan brought the news that the two cops were on board with the plan. The cops, however, did ask for 2 handguns and a car that resembled an undercover cop car. Casso obliged without a second thought. Eppolito and Carracappa tried to clock Lino's movements for months. They even staked out his Long Island home, but the two quickly realized Lino was extraordinarily careful, and with good reason. Lino, being a killer himself, knew how a hit worked. Then, on November 6, 1990, almost 4 years after the attempt on Casso's life, the news reported a Gambino wise guy had been shot and killed on the Belt Parkway. A witness would report they saw a car with a flashing police light pull next to Lino's car, and the gangster obliged by pulling over. The cops would walk up and say, "Hey, Frankie," who was Eddie's brother. Eddie laughs, and they say, "You got the wrong guy. That's my brother." Carracappa asked Eddie, "What's that on the floor?" And when he leans over to look, Carracappa puts 2 in the back of his head. At some point during the whole ordeal, Carracappa's watch was pulled off of him and broke when it landed on the road, marking the exact time of death at 6:45 p.m. Eddie, when he had pulled over, left the car running and foot on the brake. Now, after being shot, his car began to drive and hit the embankment on the side of the Belt Parkway. The witness remembers seeing a tall, skinny man run back to his car and hightail it out of the area. This was big news for the police and the mafia alike, as it was a brazen killing to shoot someone under streetlights on a busy Belt Parkway. The killers obviously felt untouchable, and in a way they were.
That's not a good answer for me, to say I didn't do it because I'm on the job.
No, it's my answer. It's my answer because I have pride in myself, Mr. Bradley. I wouldn't do that. Put my life in jeopardy, my family, disgrace the badge, disgrace the city, take everything that I'd worked for my whole life and throw it away and kill somebody in the street like a cowboy. It's not my style. It's not me.